Morning. Some experiences in life that you kind of look back with time, or even in that moment, realize what a bookmark it was for you. One chapter ending, another beginning. And maybe you can think of some in your mind's eye this morning for you, whether it was maybe at your baptism and remembering that the old life was being put away and a new life was being created by God in you. Maybe for those of us who are married on your wedding day, realizing that an old life is being put away and a new life, one, being created. At the risk of possibly sounding somewhat sacrilegious, I don't know that in my life I've experienced something that was as tangibly, viscerally, day in, day out, life-changing as becoming a father. Becoming a Christian was something that in the days thereafter was ever present in my mind, but I didn't wake up in the middle of the night to the screams of my past self. I trusted that Jesus could take care of my salvation. I didn't have someone, my wife included in this boat and taking the lion's share of it, but I didn't have someone that couldn't eat, couldn't change their diaper, couldn't even put themselves to sleep without you being there to tend to them. It is altogether an earth-shattering, life-changing bookmark that gets slammed down. And it is in every respect that you will ever hear someone speak about it as wonderful and amazing, while difficult and challenging as it gets spoken about. And there's been some changes, as one would expect, that I've noticed in myself in the weeks and months that have passed since Penelope came along. Almost 10 months now. Don't start talking about that around Elizabeth. She will tear up. It's happening too fast. That trope is true as well. For me, one of the things that I've found that's very different in a way that not so much, I didn't have this characteristic before, but now it's just so much more pronounced, and I see it in myself, and I have to try and guard my heart against some crazy thoughts at times, is this protective nature. This constant head on a swivel when we're out and about, that's worrying in the middle of the night, what was that noise, and getting up and going and checking it, and just this constant state of worrying that something would happen to her. And if you talk to any of the fathers of older children, specifically older daughters, like Mike Ryan, or I'm sure Mr. Steve, or any others in here, I'm guessing that never goes away. So I should welcome more gray hairs in the near future and days to come. It made me think of a line that I heard a former Green Beret, now politician, echoing, I think he said he heard it from a comedian, of when his son was born, he looked down at him and knew in that moment, I would die for you. And then a couple years later, when his daughter was born, he looked down, held her in his arms, and thought it was going to be a similar experience. But in that moment, he knew, I would kill for you. I can't fathom giving up that little girl for a single one of you. That's too much to ask. Not going to do it. Cannot imagine it. Someone comes along and says that is what is needed to make Steve Garrett right or David Haley right, to pay some debt that's owed. It's not happening. Sorry. I can't fathom what it must be like to not just lose a child and to feel that pain, but the idea of having to give up a child. I can't imagine that. And so the thought that hundreds of years before that man would be mounted to a cross The words of Isaiah 53 that often get read in moments like this, and that I myself have read on multiple occasions, would be penned. To have the foreknowledge of that moment that you worry about, that keeps you up at night, that maybe something would happen. To have the foreknowledge for all of eternity before, that this will be what is required. That you would give a son for people that deserve it, that have earned it, that really merited it. Far from it. For the people that, as David has spoken about in the Genesis class, that turned our back. We had a good thing going. It was kind of perfect in the garden. Lost and broken, every single one of us. At one point or another in our lives, and in the lives of every single person that's ever walked the face of this earth, turned away. Said, I don't need you, don't want your love. I can do this myself. I got this. Turns out we couldn't. Turns out we don't got this. Turns out we need him. And to know for years, for time immemorial, that those very people, your creation, who would turn their back on you, are the ones who you would give your own child, your own son, your only son for. Who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. There's a lot that can be said about doctrines of atonement. I am no theologian, philosopher, not even going to pretend to be one on TV, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so my opinions on that are quite limited this morning. However, whenever the question comes up, was it required to satisfy the divine wrath? Was it to show the divine love? I don't know, for me at least, that it matters that much, because either way it happened. Either way, he died for me. He died for you. God the Father gave his Son for me, for you, that we might be made whole again. I cannot fathom that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, we're told that whenever we partake of the bread and we partake of the cup, to examine ourselves. And I've often pondered in what ways, am I living up to the standard? Am I remembering this in a way that is appropriate and proper? And I think all of that is well and good, but having a child of my own now, I kind of find myself letting my mind slip to, am I actually living like a son of God? He gave his child that he might bring many sons to glory. Are we who sit here this morning sons and daughters that will be brought to glory? Examine your heart this morning and ask yourself that question as you partake of this bread and as you partake of this cup. When you think about the measure of the sacrifice that was required to satisfy that payment that was owed, to show that love, that immeasurable grace when we did not deserve it, think about that this morning. Think about the sacrifice that Jesus made. Think about the sacrifice that God the Father made in giving his Son for you. Because I tell you, it's one I cannot imagine. I'll leave you this morning with the words of a hymn that we sing on occasion that might be my favorite for before partaking of the Lord's Supper. How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon a cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer. But this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom.